Hi, I'm Sean. I'm a product manager and an entrepreneur, and I used to be a data scientist at Google. Today I'm reading this book called The Design of Everyday Things. It's a very good book for people like me who are data scientists looking into product because I really did not have proper trainings for design, and I was recommended to read this book to have some basic design thinking mindset. And the chapter that really got me today is called The Classification of Slips. And it has this really interesting prompt. Let me just read it to you. It says that there is this example called Description-Similarity Slip. And the example that they gave is a former student reported that one day he just came back from playing basketball, and that guy was just like, he had a totally sweaty shirt, and then the immediate thought is that he wanted to take a shower. But then when he take off his sweaty shirt, he rolled it into a ball, and instead of throwing that ball into the laundry basket, he actually threw it inside of the toilet. And the funny fact is that it wasn't his poor aim. It's not like the laundry basket and the toilet are next to each other. They're actually in separate rooms. So this is called a description-similarity slip. And essentially, it's telling us that, when people are tired or a little bit stressed or overloaded, it's pretty easy for us to, I'm just going to quote, have difficulty distinguishing among different images of things because of the similarity between them. And especially when the process are sharing some parts that require similar actions, like rolling your clothes is similar to rolling a toilet paper, I guess, and then throwing the ball, throwing things into the basket and throwing things into the toilet are pretty similar. So he just made this mistake to do the wrong thing. And it just triggered me into thinking, these things actually happen pretty often in our day-to-day life. So the explanation for similarity slip is basically, they say obviously the more the wrong and right objects have something in common, the more likely the errors are to occur. Similarly, the more objects present at the same time, the more likely the error. So imagine that, say we have been working at home for a very long time, and previously I tend to go to work, get a lot of things done, and when I get home, I'm just gonna sit on my sofa and turn on the TV and watch Netflix, right? It's a very, very common thing to do for me, but since the pandemic gets started, it was really not a good habit for me anymore because my work index is right next to the sofa. If my habit is like, I'm gonna hit the living room and go to work, but sometimes I just immediately just jump onto my sofa and sit right there, and my hand naturally just gonna touch the remote control. And then you realize, oh, hold on, this is wrong. Like you're in the work mode. You're supposed to work. So I think like these kind of similarity slips happen a lot in our day-to-day lives. So I thought this is very interesting to mention to you guys. And there's not just similarity slips. There are also a bunch of other slips that this chapter captured. One of them is called capture slips. And the example that they gave is basically, it says that somebody was using a copying machine and they were counting the pages that are coming out of the copying machine. And the person said that he found himself counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, Jack, Queen, King. And apparently he has been playing cards recently a lot. So what's funny is that it mentioned in the book that capture errors or capture slips are more prevalent in experienced or skilled people than in beginners, in part because the experienced person has automated the required actions and may not have been paying a lot of conscious attention when their intended action deviates from the more frequent one. And this is very, very interesting because oftentimes, like when we were writing programming languages, say I started learning data science by writing R, and then I started writing Python. So there are a lot of syntax differences because R is a functional programming language. So there are a lot of functional ways of writing things. Like whenever I was using visualization tools in R, say ggplot2, the whole logic is basically functional. Like after you build this component, you build the next component, yada, yada, yada. But visualizing something in Python is more sort of an object-oriented kind of way of thinking. So whenever I started writing visualization plots in Python, I still have this kind of capture slips when I was coding because of my experience in R. And now similarly, I've been learning how to use Next.js to write some full stack web pages. And actually my first front-end language was R-Shiny, and R-Shiny very, very clearly separated the front end and the back end. It's called UI and server. But in Next.js, in JavaScript React, Next.js kind of revolutionized a lot of things. It made the boundary between front end and the back end kind of blurred. You don't very specifically put something in an app called UI and put another app called the server. It's kind of all mixed up in JSX. So I still had this, sometimes this capture slips that, whenever I'm writing in a different language, the habits of the previous language that I used might just hit in and really got me thinking, okay, why did I make this mistake? And it's apparently not existent in this programming language. And another thing that it mentioned is called the memory lapse slips. Basically, it also gave some really interesting examples. It said that when you're withdrawing money from an ATM machine, the reason why these days people do not allow you to take the cash before you withdraw the card is because people very easily can forget about their card in the ATM machine. So they realize this memory failure when the task is lasting for a relatively longer period of time. And it makes sense because if you think about it in life, at least for me, sometimes if doing something takes a long time, I might forget what I wanted to do from the very beginning. Imagine I was, if I wanted to get ready to film a video, if it takes a very long time to get started, like I need to set up this machine to make it stable, to make it filming at the right height. If I am worried too much about what I dress, worried too much about the background, I might actually forget what I'm going to talk about in this video. So this memory lapse failure or memory lapse slip definitely exists a lot in our day-to-day life. For me, it's one big takeaway for me is that, I guess, two things. The first thing is whenever you want to do some task or build a product that has kind of a workflow from beginning to the end, try to make it short because people tend to have memory lapse. Nobody's gonna pay full attention to everything. People may forget about what they want to do at the end. And the second point actually was from the book. It said that there's this fact that people seldomly forget the ultimate goal of the activity. In the ATM machine case, it's the money. And I guess here the goal is a little bit different from like me filming this video, because when I'm setting up the facilities, I need to be the content creator, I need to talk. But when you're there to get that result, to get the money, it's very straightforward. So people tend not to forget about very easy ending of a process. So try to capture that, I think, when you build a product or when you're working on something. Try to make the ultimate goal very, very easy to remember, very, very easy to reach, so that in the process, do not let people to get off board before they reach the final goal. In this case, do not let people take the cash before they already taken their card back, right? So this memory lapse are very, very common causes of errors, and I'm just gonna quote this book. It said that they can lead to several kinds of errors: failing to do all of the steps of a procedure, repeating steps, forgetting the outcome of an action, or forgetting the goal or plan, thereby causing the action to be stopped. So yeah, I think this is very insightful for me when we are building products or just when we're doing day-to-day tasks. And just to end this session, I'm just going to quote one more thing from this chapter about the classification of slips. It says that most everyday errors are slips intending to do one action. You find yourself doing another. When a person says something clearly and distinctly to you, you hear something quite different. And I think that's actually very relevant to our day-to-day work, like communications, or sometimes your assumptions could be very different depending on your background, depending on if you're considered as an expert in the field. The study of slips is the study of psychology of everyday errors, and what Freud said called the psychopathology of everyday life. Freud believed that slips have hidden dark meanings, but most are accounted for by rather simple mental mechanisms. And last but not least, there was this interesting idea at this book about slips often result from a lack of attention to the task. Because when you're programming or when you're dealing with an Excel sheet, especially when you're very, very familiar with the functions in the Excel, oftentimes you don't really think. Or when you're just organizing your Notion, organizing your desktop, there are a lot of shortcuts that are already built in our memory, in our muscle memory. So when you lack kind of attention to the task, slips happen. And skilled people or experts tend to perform tasks automatically under subconscious control, right? And novices have to pay considerable conscious attention, resulting in a relatively low occurrence of slips. So I think my biggest takeaway from this chapter, the classification of slips, is if you are a builder, if you are a product manager, think about how to work with your design team such that your product will lower the risk of slips, which oftentimes could be caused because people are more skilled or familiar with their context. And try to focus on the ultimate goal. Try to make the goal sort of easy to remember. Try to reduce how much time you need to reach the goal. And do not let people to get their dopamine. Do not let people to reach their final goal before they finished everything in the middle. And if you are a user, or if you are somebody who's learning to do something, or if you're an expert in your field, try to think about what kind of things might have happened related to slips and how you might avoid that, because sometimes it could cause big troubles. It's not as funny as throwing your sweaty shirt into the toilet. An example in this book mentioned is that if you're a pilot and you hit the wrong button because you're stressed, that means hundreds of lives that could be potentially lost. So yeah, this is a great book. I recommend it.